Welcome to Hope Blooms, a podcast from the Early Pregnancy Loss Association.
At EPLA, we seek to support women and families suffering early pregnancy loss by providing resources, education, and community. It is our vision that no one suffers miscarriage alone.
Welcome back to Hope Blooms. I'm Maria Servold, EPLA's president.
And I'm Emily Carrington, EPLA's executive director. And today we are going to talk about a subject I think is really important: early pregnancy loss myths.
Yes.
They are out
They're
there.
everywhere.
They are. And I think this is one thing I think has gotten better, but I think still exists. And maybe until you really think about it or are faced with it, it's easy to just sort of internalize some of these myths. This morning at breakfast, we were talking about myths, and my 6-year-old said, like, what is a myth? And of course, no question in our house can either go unanswered or it require, like, we're looking up like the Greek etymology of myth. And but it made me think for a second, like, what is a myth? And the etymology is really just a story. This was our quick Googling. Sorry if anyone knows Greek better than we do in our house. But I said to her, it's something everyone believes is true, but isn't necessarily true, right? These are these things that sort of just float around. We talk a lot about myths and legends and things like that.
Right. And those kind of myths are like not problematic necessarily.
Sometimes, right?
It's interesting how the word has come to mean something different.
Right. Some of those myths, we talk a lot in our house, like reveal truth. When you think about a story, right? The myth, the legend, they're revealing some sort of virtue or some sort of underlying truth that's hard to say.
Right.
Pregnancy loss myths are not revealing truth. They are just these widely held, widely believed truths.
Yeah.
So, and I was thinking too about my first loss. I remember a very sweet older lady. This was 10 years ago. And it wasn't easy to talk about it in any generation. An older generation certainly didn't talk about it. And so she came up to me and just said, I heard, and I'm really sorry. She couldn't really bring herself to say the words, but she was very sweet and very gentle. And then knew that I was transitioning from working full-time to being a housewife full-time, and said, maybe next time, sort of this idea that, like, when you're not working as hard, maybe it'll work next time.
Oh, boy.
Now, having been a housewife and a full-time employee, I'm not sure
that it's easier to be home.
I'm pretty sure my cushy desk job, which I did do, I was working for a museum and I did have a lot of physical labor.
Right.
It wasn't just a cubicle job in that way, but housewifery is a lot. Yeah. I'm on my feet.
It's not
all
leisure.
Day. I never sit down and drink a cup of coffee. Last night I thought, I have not sat down yet today.
Yeah.
So, and I remember looking at her knowing, like, I don't think that's what it was.
But it's amazing to me that these things are still persistent, that like these, and how, like, where did they come from? That sort of has always been my question. Like, where did these originate? And is it just like when it happens, we automatically have, our brains want to figure out why. And so then we think, well, maybe it was this thing, maybe it was this thing. And then that just sort of gets perpetuated.
Right. And I think there can be, I don't know, right? For some people, comfort. For some people, it's absolutely destroying. And I want to get to that in a second. But for some people, it's like, well, if I can just do better next time.
Right.
If I can just change it, if I can just. And some people really internalize fault. I know before my losses, I actually I was so ridiculously careful, like to a point that was probably then like causing stress. Yeah. And so then it's so circular, because that's one of the myths too, right? So I'm like reading every ingredient. I'm trying to decide. I won't even say some of this. I will say right now, if you're like my brain, I don't want to give if you get ideas for anxiety easily, this may not be your episode.
More
But
things to worry
if
about.
you want to hear, but if you want to hear, I was looking at every single ingredient. Like, can I eat rice if it's been, in a field that used to be grown with cotton because now there's arsenic? And Adam was just staring at me like, woman, I think you need to eat dinner.
Yeah, right.
I think our food is safe and healthy. And all of these things that were just compounding, like, it's going to be my fault. It's going to be my fault. In some ways, after the loss actually happened, I was really spared of that guilt.
Interesting.
But
was that because people told you didn't cause this, or?
I think it was I think it was a combination of my bigger anxiety was actually in the fear of the unknown. So when the worst case actually happened, I was suddenly dealing in reality.
Right.
This is some counseling moments with them. And as opposed to dealing in the alternate reality.
Right. All those possibilities of choices you could make that might be the wrong choice or something. Yeah.
And that's sort of been consistent with my experience. I deal with actual tragedy and trauma better than I deal with the potential of tragedy and trauma. So in some ways that doesn't surprise me. But I know for others, well, what was your experience?
Yeah, I feel like because it was so not in my head at all that miscarriage was even a possibility, I just hadn't ever thought about it as a potential outcome. So then when it did happen, I think I'm sure I thought, was there something I did? But then like my mom and others quickly said, no, it's not your fault. Also, it was so sort of early and spontaneous that I felt like it just wasn't meant to be or something,
Well, and I think right now we're sort of talking on the presumption of the number one overarching myth is somehow it's your fault.
Right.
So let's talk about some of those
specific things.
Yeah. So a common one. This one stresses me out because like stress can cause a miscarriage. That is a myth.
Yeah.
This is one, right? The more you stress about stress, the more you'll stress. And they're right. Like we've got to find ways for our health to not stress, but that's the most frustrating health advice I've ever had. But stress is not the cause of your miscarriage.
Right.
Worrying.
You being worried is not going to.
That is not
make it happen.
And I think we'll go back to this, but so many miscarriages are chromosomal abnormalities.
Yep.
That's not caused by stress.
Right.
That's not what made this not work. That means that at the time of conception or somewhere along the way, things didn't go right.
Right. On a microbiological level that you can't control.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And that's so hard where this like you're growing a human inside of you and it's your body and really just trusting that.
Yes, that's always been my, not frustration, but sort of, I mean, through a whole pregnancy, even if it goes to term, it's like how it's my body and yet I have no control over what's happening, know, like it's happening on its own for better or for worse. And, and so some of those times it doesn't work and sometimes it does. And that can be very frustrating, but anyway. It's the way it is.
Another one, wearing a seatbelt can cause miscarriage. Please wear your seatbelts. Yes. Please wear your seatbelt.
I know. I wonder where something like that comes from. I don't know.
Well, right. And in the case of an accident, and again, we are not doctors or EMTs here, but I'm going to just say right now, staying in the car and not being ejected from the car will protect your baby, especially in early miscarriage, if there's some sort of case in later miscarriage. But again, if you are in an accident that is so violent that your seatbelt might in some way cause damage to your baby, then you are probably going to be ejected from that car, and that will also cause damage to your baby. Right. I don't know, but
always wear your seatbelt.
Please wear your seatbelts. That is the safest thing for you and your baby. All right. So what's the next one, Maria?
The next one says working can cause a miscarriage, which is not the case. I do think it's important if you do some sort of physical labor to talk to your boss and sort of see if you can take it easier, and take more breaks and that kind of thing, just for your
take care of
overall
your
health.
body
Yeah.
and what you need. And I have seen things, even with exercise, like it's one thing if who am I'm not sedentary, I stand on my feet, but I don't even think this will cause miscarriage. This is for your health.
Right.
It's one thing to all of a sudden, I don't know. If your working is like professional boxing,
yeah,
go talk to your doctor.
Right. But most people's normal jobs are not gonna trigger that.
No, that's not. Again, I don't know how being at home is any less work than working.
Right.
And there may be situations where your doctor needs you to rest, and remember that your doctor is treating two patients, you and the baby.
And that's a very important thing in all this, is to talk to your own doctor about your own situation, and then they, knowing your lifestyle and everything, can help make recommendations. Because if you're super active, they always say, like, don't start brand new crazy physical stuff when you get pregnant. If you're already very active and physical,
yes,
you can keep it up if your doctor approves, but don't like start training for a triathlon if you've never run a mile.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I love this next one. Wearing high heels
or tight pants
can cause a miscarriage.
First of all, tight pants are not comfortable when you're bloated in the first trimester, but it's not going to cause a problem inside your body. Yeah. Nothing you wear is going to cause you to miscarry.
These are so,
and when we put this together, these were things that were like commonly, we didn't pick rant. Do you know what I mean? Like, these were things we found everywhere, but.
Yeah. Sex can cause a miscarriage. No.
No.
No. I mean, there are some things you need to practice, if you're, this is not a good time for an STI. That's going to be problematic, probably. Again, I'm not a doctor, but also there's some, you want to make sure your hygiene is good. Even some very basic infections, like these are not even necessarily, I don't even know that these cause miscarriage. These are more just sexual hygiene.
Right.
That while you're pregnant, you want to watch, for infections like BV. Those are very easily treatable. But sex itself, and I want to get to another myth too that I've heard. With a quick anatomy lesson, your baby's protected by your cervix.
Yes.
Because another one I've heard too is I had my 8-week ultrasound and they did an internal vaginal ultrasound, and then I had a miscarriage and it's the doctor's fault. That's not really how the anatomy works.
Right.
Your baby is protected in your uterus on the other side of your cervix.
Which is closed throughout pregnancy until it's time to give birth. Yeah.
So nothing, assuming that, again, that proper hygiene is being practiced, that you should practice all the time.
Right. Yeah.
These things are not going, because I remember asking a doctor, because a concerned friend came to me and said, my friend had a ultrasound and then a miscarriage happened, and is this malpractice? And the answer, was sort of really no.
Yeah.
The unfortunate reality is that most miscarriages happen in the first trimester.
Yes. Right.
So these are going to be sort of,
they're going to look like they go together, but they don't necessarily.
Right.
And there are cases where you may have a particular problem with your anatomy, like the incompetent cervix problem, which if your doctor discovers you have that, they'll put in the little stitch, and then I think you are kind of on pelvic rest for the rest of the pregnancy, but that would be discussed with your doctor. But if you have a normal situation, any doctor would tell you that it's okay to engage in that and it won't cause a problem. The next is morning sickness can cause miscarriage.
This is interesting because there's a myth in both directions.
Right.
So, no, morning sickness is a very normal part of pregnancy.
Right.
Again, I mean, so much of this, I encourage you to take care of yourself.
Right. And if you get, it's unhealthy for you if you get so sick you're very dehydrated or something, but I don't think that's going to trigger a miscarriage. It's just not good for you in general, which then it's going to be harder for your body to take care of the baby the best it can. But
the other side, I've heard this the other way. Good and sick, good and pregnant.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that myth is very frustrating to
Yes.
me
Yes.
because I'm good and sick every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't mattered.
Mm-hmm.
It means your HCG is going up likely. I mean, there's a lot they don't
Yeah.
know about morning sickness. But
Frustratingly mysterious.
not
But
being sick doesn't mean
that the baby's not healthy.
right.
Right.
And being sick, unfortunately, I was eating saltines. My first, especially, I was so sick. It wasn't the sickest I've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
This is weird too, right? Like, definitely, probably with this, my second was the sickest I've ever been. Some of that, though, was compounded with the fact I had a 2.5-year-old
Mm-hmm.
to chase. But I was everyone's definition of good and sick.
Mm.
I was nibbling crackers. I was throwing up regularly. I remember the morning after I was diagnosed, coming downstairs and smelling eggs
Yeah.
and like running to the bathroom
Yeah.
and then being so angry because the baby wasn't even alive.
Yes. Yes.
But my HCG was still doing its thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I think those are related. They're not only. And then literally, like the morning of my DNC, I was sick.
Mm.
I came home from my DNC and ate a sub sandwich and macaroni and cheese from McAllister's, and it was like the best meal I had had in months. So it was still like sad and anxious. It wasn't just this like mental game. It was like, I feel good now.
Mm.
It's like my post-pregnancy meals, right?
Yes.
Where like after you've had a baby and then you're like, this tastes amazing.
Yes. I had a turkey sandwich from like some fridge, in the labor and delivery wing after my first birth. And my mom says she remembers coming in and seeing me eating it like, an hour after I gave birth. And she said it looked not delicious at all. But in my memory, it is the best darn turkey sandwich I've ever had. It's like because I didn't eat for so long.
Yeah, I totally. So the good and sick, good and pregnant is a myth.
It does go both ways. And because some women are not sick at all and they have a perfectly healthy pregnancy and they're worried.
And they're so worried because they're not sick or they don't feel pregnant.
Right.
So your sickness is just your, don't over analyze that. So the next one, exercise can cause a miscarriage. We already talked about this a little bit with like working.
I think it's just important to talk with your doctor about your current lifestyle for working and exercising, and so that you're taking care of your body, not so that you avoid causing a miscarriage, because that's the myth part. But they always say don't start some crazy new program like as soon as you get pregnant. But which is just not good for you in general. Right. Let your body do its work.
Again, we'll move here to like the actual facts. But when you realize all of these sort of assume that your body's just like expelling the pregnancy because of some sort of
one
overwork.
thing you do. Yeah, right.
And when that's just really not
the case. Yeah.
The case.
This last one I think is almost sort of the most insidious and sad too, right? The myth that if you don't want to be pregnant, then you will miscarry.
It's some sort of like karma.
Yes. And it's so sad, especially if it's like an unexpected pregnancy. And then, first maybe you're like, oh no, what am I going to do? And then maybe you come around to accepting it and then the baby dies. That's very hard.
And there's so many complicated feelings when you don't want to be pregnant. And so many, it complicates the grief. Either the grief is more than you thought. Maybe there's relief for some reason. But if just not wanting to be pregnant could cause a miscarriage, then in some ways life would be easier, right? I mean, it wouldn't. That'd be awful. But at the same time, like, it's not.
Yeah. Your feelings can't cause it.
No.
Yeah.
No. So we put these together. These are actually what we're reading from. These are in our care kits. We put this together, I guess probably 6-7 years ago now, with the help of a local nurse and the internet and our own things that have been said to us. It's a myths and facts card that we put in all of our kits because we just think it's important. It says at the top, we've sort of said this, but I just want to read this. Unfortunately, there are no shortage of myths and misinformation about miscarriage. Nearly half of all miscarriages are caused by chromosomal abnormality. And for many of the rest, there's no known cause. So like with my second, the chromosomes, I don't know how many times I'm going to have to say that word on air. I'm not for some reason, it's a hard word for me to say, didn't double and split the way they were supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So the process was, I don't even know what the word is, just not going right. And it was never going to be
It was
a
never
viable
going
baby.
to be. Right.
It was a little boy. It was a little soul, but it
Mhm.
was never going to be turned into a viable
Mhm.
baby.
Mhm. Was it the only one you were able to do the testing on?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the only one we know gender, and that's the only one we know what happened.
Mhm.
So, and that was just sort of,
Yeah.
process, and there was no intervening. There's no,
Mhm. Right. There's no magical thing you can do to fix it.
right.
Right.
Yeah. So, and those are challenging,
Mhm.
because I think you have to hold intention that it was not your fault. We've talked about this before too. It's not your fault, but then they like go into action to see if we can prevent it.
Mhm.
So we did treat my thyroid later.
Mhm.
I also took progesterone supplements to maintain a pregnancy,
Mhm.
but none of mine were spontaneous. Well, they were all spontaneous, but none of them did I start bleeding before
Mhm.
the baby died. So, I think there's a lot we don't know, but what
Yeah.
we do know is that your normal daily emotions, feelings, and activities are not what cause miscarriage.
Mhm.
That they are protected inside of you,
Mhm.
and otherwise, a human species.
Yeah, we wouldn't have made it this far.
So let's talk a little bit for a minute about miscarriage facts.
Mhm.
What do we know?
Well, yes, one of the things we've already mentioned that about half of first trimester miscarriages are due to those fetal chromosomal abnormalities. It is miscarriages most likely to occur in the first trimester. We have here that 80% of miscarriages occur in the first trimester, which is what we focus on through our group at, pre 20 weeks. And then we talk a lot about the overall percentage of how many pregnancies end in miscarriage. And, we've heard up to what, 1 in 5, 1 in 4, or 1 in 5, but that's like of all of them, even if they're not known. What we have here that's been like reported is that at least 10% of all clinically recognized pregnancies end in loss, which is not a small number.
No.
And that's like once it's been, recognized by a doctor and that kind of thing. Because a lot of like a chemical pregnancy, for instance, you may know, but no one else does, or you may not even know because it could sort of come and go before the next cycle starts. But
yeah, and I do think that 1 in 4 number is pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
All pregnancies.
Mhm.
This is definitely the conservative.
Yeah.
Um,
Like officially reported
at the
statistic.
very least. Yeah. So we also know, here's a myth we didn't talk about, that once you've had a miscarriage, you're more likely to have another miscarriage.
Right.
And recurrent miscarriages is unfortunately a thing. I've experienced it, but
you're not necessarily more likely, but would you say like in your situation, you were maybe as likely because of the thyroid thing until that got figured out? Or what did a doctor say about that?
Well, and again, that's still sort of mysterious.
Yeah.
I think, that I was one of the unlucky, which is part of why they wait for testing.
Yeah.
Most women will experience a healthy pregnancy after a miscarriage.
Right.
And actually, this is crazy. Recurrent miscarriage, which is considered 3 or more, only affects 1 to 2% of women.
Mm.
And then even women who have experienced recurrent miscarriages are likely to have a successful pregnancy, which is true. I've had 2. So I think it would be like, I'm the unlucky few who might have a findable underlying issue, which again, my thyroid levels are not my fault.
Right.
And mine are subclinical. It's kind of messy. They're on paper not that bad.
Right.
So,
but you had a doctor who cared enough to look and thought, let's try this. And then that was the thing.
And to take that seriously.
Yeah.
And other people I know have had numbers off the charts and have had successful pregnancies.
Right.
So it's not a like to the book.
Right. Right. And it's not like you were, after one loss, your chance of miscarriage increased, and then after another one, it increased again. It didn't work like that.
Exactly.
It's just sort of like maybe your body wasn't starting from the most ideal standpoint, and then they were able to address that. But yeah, I mean, you think about people who are in all ways seemingly healthy and they struggle, and then people who maybe live a more unhealthy lifestyle and don't struggle. And so that's sort of the frustrating, mysterious part of it. But the point is, don't, sort of get yourself caught in this mind trap where if you have one that you think it's going to always be that way. Yeah, I had, my first pregnancy was a loss. So then I sort of for a while had this feeling like, will they all be like that? Right. And then throughout the next pregnancy was my now 9-year-old. And the whole time I just kept thinking, well, this could end any minute, why this could very well end any minute. So then it's like, once I reached, the point of like, 24 weeks or whatever, I was like, okay, they could save her. Didn't know it was a surprise. They could save the baby now if something were to happen, and like, as the weeks go by, you just keep, holding on to that. But I remember feeling the whole time like this could end any second because that's all I knew,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think one of the biggest overarching myths that we've lived under is, I'm looking back at an article that I really loved about, it was written in 2015 on NPR. I'll post the link in the comments or in the info section. That silence is going to make all of this better. And I think that's where these myths sort of perpetuated, right?
Right.
And I think, it's Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. Like this is what we're talking about. This is why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this quote from this article because this article goes through sort of some of the public misconceptions. So It's not talking specifically about myths, though it has a section on myths, but just sort of misconceptions and understanding. And so I'm going to quote a quote, but one person who recently suffered a miscarriage summed it up. While I'm definitely still healing emotionally, I would be happy to talk about it more. So many people grieve silently, but I found that talking really helps the most. That's the kind of conversation that Williams says he and his co-authors would like to spark with their survey. Miscarriage is ancient. It's always been there. And all too often, he says, people often blame themselves and don't discuss it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's so good because it's like if you're in silence and you're not talking to anyone, your brain is going to be like, well, maybe it was this thing. Maybe it was this thing. Maybe I did this thing. But if someone else, you talk to one other person, they say to you correctly, it's not your fault. That makes a huge difference just immediately. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's so to have those understandings of how it works.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting just how little, and some of this is experience, and I think this is true with sort of any awareness. Like, we don't all need to be doctors, but I think it's important to have some very basic understanding of anatomy, of process, of human and fetal development, of what's actually happening in your body. And I think there's so much more we know now than we knew 50 years ago.
Yeah,
it was mysterious, right?
Which is probably where a lot of these myths came from, because
Exactly.
they didn't know what else to blame,
Right. And old wives' tales have existed forever.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes there's truth in those. Sometimes you really just do need some soup, and some rest, and some fresh air, right?
Yeah.
But I think we have to, sort of find the intersection of where truth, taking care. A lot of these myths, I think, point to not taking care of yourself during pregnancy. But that's just going to cause health issues for you.
Yeah, right.
And so I think we have to be very, very careful and very open. I think also, we have some really good episodes here about miscarriage and the basics and talking with doctors. Miscarriage, the basics, and more. I highly recommend, if this is something that you want to understand what is happening or what did happen to your baby in your body. Those are good things to look at. So again, though, I think like reiterating that just normal, healthy activities
Mm-hmm.
are not.
Are not gonna. Yeah.
I don't think your baby knows you're wearing high heels.
Yeah, exactly. Your uterus does not know.
No.
And again, if there's something about your life that worries you, ask your doctor about it, and they can help you, either make changes or tell you it's not to worry about. But that's the best thing to do, is to ask your healthcare provider who's helping you through pregnancy what things to think about. So
Exactly. Happy, healthy pregnancies are the goal, and
Mhm.
try to enjoy even the early days.
Mhm.
And even if you don't, that's fine. I never do, but I it's so hard. It's so hard, and it's so unfortunate that these are circulating around.
Yeah.
But I think we are making huge strides
Mhm.
towards busting these, talking about these,
Mhm.
and making it, really clear, and knowing more and seeking more what is
Mhm.
actually causing miscarriage. And
Yep.
I have hope that like as we do more testing,
We'll learn
I'm
more.
not sure miscarriage will ever fully go away.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's partly because of this. It's not something simple.
Right.
It's not just like stop wearing high heels.
Right.
I don't think it's ever going to just go away. Like our mission has never been to like eradicate
Right.
miscarriage, sort of in the way, that we're looking for a cure for cancer. I don't want to be hopeless, but unfortunately, there really is like
I don't think we can solve the chromosomal problem.
right,
Without getting
or
into
without
some
getting into some
yeah,
things we don't
some things that are
actually
not
want
good.
to get into.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we can't solve the problem, cancer or not.
Yeah.
Right. Even if we find the cure for cancer, we're not going to find the cure for death.
Right. Exactly.
Nor should we.
Right.
What we should do instead is find sort of the balm for death.
Yes.
And the hope in death.
Right. And to help, in our case, help women understand, that it's not their fault and that we can take care of them, and here's how to move forward.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is dark and it is sad and it is death is hard.
Mhm.
And awful. So I think that's where we end.
Yeah.
So we hope that this has encouraged you, and we hope that this has brought you some peace.
Mhm.
Definitely check our information section, because I'm gonna put a bunch of resources there that hopefully bring peace to you.
Yeah. Or someone who's gone through it. This would be a good one to share.
Exactly. So thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to Hope Blooms, a podcast from the Early Pregnancy Loss Association.
To learn more about how we and you can support women suffering early pregnancy loss, visit our website at miscarriagecare.com or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you for listening.